And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, would I be able to donate my old, barely functioning toaster if I included 2 slices of bread with it? And with free COVID tests now available on the government's website, where am I going to go next to get my drink on and share some droplets? And now, the podcast host who would never settle for less than a first-class upgrade on his next domestic flight, Pete Dominic.
That is right, Pete Co. What an announcer you are. Thank you very much for this and every day's introduction and all that you are contributing to the program. That's right. I think he is commenting on the fact that my friend, comedian Lori Kilmartin, tweeted yesterday that she was on a JetBlue flight that had been delayed like 3 hours, and for whatever reason, there were nobody in the best seats there, those first class seats, whatever they call them, the really nice ones in JetBlue, and they didn't upgrade. Like they were all empty, and they didn't upgrade the people, and maybe they should have upgraded folks after being delayed so long. And so I had commented about that, and I'm sure that is what that is about. And I agree. I mean, the idea that you would leave the luxury seats just empty when there are people, I don't know. I don't run an airline. Who am I to say? Hello, my friends. Welcome to today's episode of Stand Up. I'm very happy to have you joining me here in the shed, the solar-powered shed here in Rockland County, where Indy and I are just chilling, hanging out, making a show. And oh, what a show I've got for you today. Turo Paul joins me again. She joined me early on in the podcast, but she impressed me so much with her book and with her work, and I was very happy to talk with her. I think she's really a thought leader when it comes to food culture and well-being and sustainability in the digital age. She's got a great book that she wrote, and she is expecting her second daughter like any day now. I had a great conversation with her. And then I got the cult expert, Stephen Hassan, back on the program. He's launching a new podcast and reached out and asked me to talk with him, and I'm always happy to talk with this guy. Brilliant guy. Happy to promote his podcast. Turo Paul, Steve Hassan, Dr. Steve Hassan, both join me today. I think you're going to love these conversations, which I curated very well. Very happy to have both of them. And I've got you. Want to hear from you, as always. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Lots to talk about in the world here on a Wednesday in the middle, smack in the middle of January. Is it late January? I guess it's the 19th when I'm 18th, 19th recording and posting this. So I hope you're hanging in there here in the dark and the cold. At least that's the way it is in the Northeast. Those of you listening around the country, around the world, very happy to have you. Hopefully you'll join me tomorrow night's hangout. If you're a stand-up community member, you can always do that. Go to standupwithpete.com right now and sign up. If you're in the suck, if you're depressed, if you're miserable, if you're feeling static, hang out with us on a Thursday night. Get rejuvenated every Thursday night at our virtual happy hours. It always seems to be what the doctor ordered. And we've really been having fun with it lately. Our friend Karen Madison is out there dating, and we're doing a weekly segment with her at the Hangouts where she recaps her dates from the week or any conversations she has with what she refers to as gentlemen suitors. And we call it I Hate It Here. It's so fun that I look forward to it so much on Thursdays, and I know so many of you do as well. You ought to join us by signing up right now if you haven't already. Check it out, standupwithpete.com. All right, well, now it's time to get to the news segment. Before I get to my guests, I got to tell you what happened in the last 24 hours. This is the most comprehensive recap in news. I've got sound, I've got stories, and maybe a little pithy commentary. Let's do it. Time for the last 24. All right, well, we've got to start with the fact that the U.S. Senate officially took up Democrats' voting rights bill, which passed the House in a party line vote last week. The proposal is expected to fail in the Senate after stupid jerk Democrats Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema have made it clear that they would not support change in the filibuster to allow the bill's passage. Despite the bill's likely failure, Chuck Schumer said the Senate would vote on the legislation win, lose, or draw. Members of the chamber were elected to debate and to vote, especially on an issue as vital as the beating heart of our democracy is voting rights, the majority leader said in a floor speech. And I've got a bunch of these senators to play for you. But first, let me kick it off with what Stevie Wonder, yes, the legend, Stevie Wonder made a video, and this is what he had to say about senators' history, the filibuster.
Any senator who cannot support the protection of voting rights in the United States of America cannot say that they support the Constitution. Stop the hypocrisy. Cut the bull-ish. If you care and support our rights, do the hard work. You can't please everybody, but you can protect all of us. And to keep it all the way real, the filibuster is not working for democracy. Why won't you?
Yeah, the filibuster is not working for democracy. Why won't you? Imagine being called out by Martin Luther King III, his granddaughter, and Stevie Wonder. Oof. All right, here's Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer kicking it off yesterday.
As we debate these measures, the Senate will confront a critical question. Shall the members of this chamber do what is necessary to pass these bills and bring them closer to the president's desk? Today, we have just taken the first steps that will put everyone on the record. Now, much has been said over the past few days about the prospects of passing voting rights legislation in this chamber. Senate Democrats are under no illusion that we face difficult odds, especially when virtually every Senate Republican is staunchly against legislation protecting the right to vote.
There you go, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. Unfortunately, there's this guy. Here's Joe Manchin yesterday wearing like a red pullover windbreaker or something. He looked like an idiot as always. Anyway, here he is.
The only thing I've been very clear about that, I just don't know how you break a rule to make a rule and thinking you're doing something that's going to. We've never done this. We have never done. I've been looking for every precedent I can, every carve out. The bottom line is everything that we've done. They've told me about the debt ceiling. That was done by the rules. Okay? And that was done with Majority Leader Schumer and Minority Leader McConnell coming to an agreement. That's what it's all about. So we've done everything along the lines of with the rules. And I don't know why we can't come together and find a pathway forward. But breaking the rules, there's no checks and balances in this process. The only thing we have is a filibuster. And think if you have a situation we have right now, where you have the executive branch of government and you have Congress, the House and the Senate, they're all the same, and there's no check and balance because basically you just sweep right through, and the same thing could happen if Republicans had everything. And the only thing I've ever said was this. The majority of my colleagues in the caucus, Democrat caucus, they've changed. They've changed their mind. I respect that. You have a right to change your mind. I haven't. I hope they respect that, too. I've never changed my mind on the filibuster.
All right, there you go. We get it. That's Joe Manchin. He doesn't seem to be moving anytime soon. Now, here is the always amazing Senator Raphael Warnock.
And as the pastor of Ebenezer Church, where Martin Luther King Jr. preached, I take great umbrage with members of this body who are arguing that somehow this is a federal takeover. They are marshaling old states' rights arguments, the same arguments that Faubus used, Governor Faubus, in response to Brown versus Board of Education. The same arguments used by Richard B. Russell of Georgia when he wanted to stand in the way of civil rights. The same arguments used by Strom Thurmond when he had the largest filibuster in the history of the Senate arguing against voting rights. What did he argue? He argued for states' rights. And that's what we've been hearing in recent days. And so let the message go out. You cannot remember Martin Luther King Jr. and dismember his legacy at the same time.
Ooh, I like that quote. You cannot remember MLK Jr. and dismember his legacy at the same time. That was some powerful stuff from Senator Warnock of Georgia. And now here's some less powerful stuff from 700-year-old senator from Iowa. This is Chuck Grassley asking the most relevant question about voting rights. Here it is.
Democrats accused Republicans of wanting to keep people from voting. Why would we want to keep people from voting when we have been very successful in many large turnout elections very recently?
All right. Well, because, well, in a lot of places, in a lot of states, you can't win on ideas anymore. You don't have enough people. And so you got to make it harder for the people to vote. That's why. It's been the case forever. I can't believe I have to explain that. All right. Well, here is Senator Mazie Hirono, who I absolutely love. Always powerful statement on the Senate floor as debate begins.
Let's not pretend this is about the sanctity of this institution. We cannot sit back and let one political party continue to unravel the threads of our democracy, one voter suppression bill at a time. While Republicans do nothing to protect our freedom to vote in the face of mass voter suppression bills enacted across the country, we Democrats cannot sit back and let 2020 be the last free and fair election in our country. If we don't protect the right to vote, we won't have a democracy. It's that simple. That's the reality.
Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii, who's been here on the show, and I should probably get her back as well as this next senator also joined me here on the podcast because I'm very powerful and very well connected. Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon, who also had some powerful statements on the Senate floor as debate began on this legislation that is destined apparently to fail. Senator Merkley?
It is time to make sure that we have a debate on final passage, not just on this amendment or that amendment, but on final passage. That we have every person accountable to the public on where we stand. And what happened in 1891 introduced 75 years of entrenched discrimination in our land, 75 years of trampling rights until the 1965 vote was passed. Voting rights was passed. Generations may flow from us now in which the rights of Americans are trampled if we do not act.
All right, Senator Jeff Merkley pretty clearly stating the circumstances right there. Now let's hear from a guy who wants to be a senator in Ohio, currently Congressman Tim Ryan, who I've also interviewed here on the podcast and at SiriusXM. Tim Ryan of Ohio on CNN.
And the Republicans are MIA. I mean, they're not even, I mean, they're worthless. The Republican Party right now is worthless. They do nothing. They make matters completely worse than they need to be. If we had some cooperation from them, whether it's voting rights, whether it's a tax cut. I mean, now we have the Republican Party that was supposedly built on tax cuts won't support tax cuts for working families, which means they support tax cuts for the top 1% and lowering corporate rates for the big corporations, the Amazons of the world. But for the small businesses and the working class people that are out there, they're not for those tax cuts. So let me be very, very clear. While I'm frustrated with the administration, I'm really ripped over what the Republicans are doing because they're worthless and they're not contributing to try to solve these big problems.
All right, Tim Ryan on CNN yesterday. Let me shift gears now to what's happening in Russia, Ukraine. Here is first the president's spokeswoman, Jen Psaki, on this yesterday.
Let's be clear. Our view is this is an extremely dangerous situation. We're now at a stage where Russia could at any point launch an attack in Ukraine. And what Secretary Blinken is going to go do is highlight very clearly there is a diplomatic path forward. It is the choice of President Putin and the Russians to make whether they are going to suffer severe economic consequences or not.
All right. And here is the Pentagon spokesman, Department of Defense. This is Admiral Kirby talking about the same issue. And neither of these two seem like we've got any leverage or any opportunity to stop the Russian invasion, which unfortunately seems imminent at this point. I'm planning on talking with Andrea Chalupa about it, by the way, tomorrow from Gaslit Nation. But here is John Kirby.
It would be difficult for us to say with specificity and certainty what we know Mr. Putin is driving at here, what his actual goals are. He clearly is building up a force posture there that provides him multiple options. It's just difficult to know right now what options he's going to choose. and we still don't believe that he's made a final decision. Of course, the option that we would prefer is for him to de-escalate, to take the tensions down. And of course, one of the easiest ways to do that would be to remove some of that force presence. That's not happening.
Well, it's not looking good. It's just not looking good. Crazy to think what's happening over there. I'll talk with Andrea Chalupa on tomorrow's show right here, and looking forward to that. Who else are you listening to on this? Few of you sent me suggestions on it and want to hear more about it. I certainly do, too. All right, I saw this and wanted to play it for you. I thought it was a pretty powerful statement from one of the 4 people taken hostage at that synagogue in Texas over the weekend. He had a message on MSNBC for what was a rebuke of anti-Semitic rhetoric. His name is Jeffrey Cohen, and he was on MSNBC with Chris Jansen, who asked him this.
But I have to ask you what your feeling is about this man. Angry? Do you hate him? Do you forgive him?
You know, I don't know. And I'm not one of these people who can just, forgive. So I can't say that I forgive him. But I do recognize, first of all, he was mentally ill. I mean, his brother has said so, and the way he behaved makes me believe that. Secondly, he bought into these tropes. He was not your typical attacker who came in and I just want to kill all the Jews. That was not him. He came to the Jews because he bought into these very dangerous stories that the Jews control the world and the Jews control the government and the banks and the media. And we as good people and we as patriotic Americans, we need to challenge those things when we hear them, because these words do have consequences. They play on people's ears. They play on people's fears. And it leads to actions like this, where people believe that if they want to accomplish a political act, terror to one group or another, and in this case to Jews, is not just capable, it'll be successful, and it's acceptable.
Powerful commentary from Jeff Cohen there on MSNBC yesterday. And before I wrap up the audio, I want to play something from Laura Coates, whose new book is out. You got to get it. It's so good. I'll be having her on again to talk about the rest of it. We talked about the first part of it already. Very excited for this. But she was on with Tamron Hall, who asked her the question about everybody's wanting to know, which was, why didn't she get the Jeopardy gig if Alex Trebek wanted her to?
And I asked for the opportunity when it came time, when they were looking for people to possibly fill in. I certainly raised my hand and knocked on doors and found them closed. And I asked for the opportunity. I was told no, which is one of those moments, Tamron, when you have to remember to wear your own jersey. You have to remember to continue to be your own champion in other respects. And sometimes the vision that you have for yourself or those that surprise you from other people don't align with what happens. And that happened there.
All right, there you go. That is the story, or just a little bit of it, from Tamron Hall's show where Laura Coates was. She's also been on NPR, Fresh Air, and so many other shows out there promoting her book. I'm so proud of her. Completely unsurprised. I tweeted yesterday, if you look through her timeline, you'll see how many amazing people Laura Coates has affected with her work, and she's just getting started. I'm so unsurprised and yet so proud. If you haven't gotten her new book, let's go. Go get it now. Just Pursuit is the name of it. All right, that's all the sound I've got for you in the last 24, but I've also just got some COVID-related news for you. COVID news. Starting with, at least 20% of Americans have now been infected with COVID-19, according to data. The data shows more than 66.5 million Americans have been infected with the coronavirus since the pandemic began in early 2020. The country has now seen more than 850,000 deaths. The total number of Americans who had COVID-19 could be much higher due to asymptomatic cases, of course. Somehow I have still been able to evade it, but I see it coming. Who knows? Who knows when you're gonna get around? Yeah. All right. Sorry about that jingle. It was horrible. Australia is reporting a record COVID-19 deaths. Australia reported 77 COVID-19 deaths on Tuesday, the most is recorded in a single day during the entire pandemic, according to Reuters. Meanwhile, we've got like 1,800 a day. The country's previous record was 57 deaths. And according to the New York Times, 1,152 people were hospitalized due to COVID-19 on Tuesday in Australia, 127 people in intensive care, and 43 needing to be put on ventilators. Those are the Australian numbers, which I haven't mentioned. COVID pandemic is nowhere near over. New variants are likely to emerge, according to the World Health Organization chief said Tuesday, while cautioning against the narrative that the fast-spreading Omicron variant is mild. So there you go. That's the depressing news about that. The government website where you can request a free at-home COVID-19 test launched Tuesday. It's now accepting orders. You can check it out at covidtests.gov. covidtests.gov. The launch aims to address troubleshooting and to ensure as smooth of an official launch of the website as possible. The president announced the program back in December. And let's see, what else have I got for you? Less than 10% of Africa is vaccinated as the world has reached the halfway mark. Oklahoma has called on state employees to substitute amid the teacher shortage as a result of coronavirus there. And 1 million COVID-19 cases were recorded in California this past week alone. Just a few of the numbers on COVID in today's COVID News.
COVID News.
All right, now it's time for everything else I've got for you, rapid fire style. Here are the headlines in today's news dump and a brand new original jingle from Pete Coe, inspired by a story about an elephant that flipped over an SUV with a family in it at a wildlife nature park in South Africa.
Family wild safari car feels a great big thump. Didn't see that elephant trunk on today's news dump.
You got to watch out for the elephant trunk there. It's a crazy story. Thank you, Pete Coe, as always. All right, well, let's start with the Supreme Court. They today rejected a bid to block the mask mandate on airplanes. The emergency application was filed by a father on behalf of himself and his 4-year-old autistic son, both to claim to be medically incapable of wearing masks for extended periods. But the Supreme Court rejected the request to block this federal mask mandate for air travel, which is part of an executive order signed by President Biden, the Transportation Security Administration, which requires passengers on planes and other public transportation to wear masks to reduce the spread of coronavirus. And how about this story? Cracker Barrel was ordered to pay $9.4 million to a man who was served a toxic chemical instead of water in April 2014. The jury returned a verdict for compensatory damages of $4.3 million in just 30 minutes, one of the fastest verdicts we've ever seen, and awarded punitive damages $5 million after only 10 minutes of additional deliberation, according to CNN. Pretty crazy story. Wow, how did that even happen? I don't know. I'm not reading it, but if you want to, there you go. The FDA-funded study, an FDA-funded study, is aimed to lift restrictions on blood donations for gay and bisexual men. Huge story. A new study evaluated an FDA policy barring some men from donating blood. Under current FDA guidelines, men who have sex with other men may not donate blood if they've had sexual contact with another man less than 3 months prior to donation. This new study aims to develop a questionnaire based on individual risk assessment to replace the FDA's existing abstinent policy, which has been criticized by activists for years. Vermont's Republican governor has come out and backed all male elections, not male M-A-L-E, but M-A-I-L. It's not going to be elections just for men, although I know a lot of Republicans want to roll those rights back. Yesterday, the Vermont governor, who is a Republican, Phil Scott, said he wants his state to become the latest to conduct all elections entirely by mail. A move he said would expand voter access and turnout at a time when many Republican-led states are debating restrictions on absentee ballots. I think 5 states have all mail-in ballots right now, and 3 of the states have higher turnout, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington. They already conduct their elections entirely by mail. So that's an interesting development. The January 6th panel has subpoenaed former Trump attorneys Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell, probably one of the biggest developing stories in yesterday's news cycle, if you want to look into it. I mentioned Russia moving more troops westward amid Ukraine tensions. according to the Associated Press. Let's see, what else have I got for you? A comet more than 3 times the size of the Empire State Building got up close to Earth's orbit Tuesday afternoon, but was far enough to avoid turning into a sci-fi disaster movie, according to astronauts. NASA had been tracking the object for decades through its planetary defense systems. Said that the asteroid, which measured a kilometer in diameter, came around 1.2 million miles away from Earth's atmosphere. So I guess that's not even a near miss. I don't know how they measure such things. Microsoft announced plans on Tuesday to acquire gaming giant Activision Blizzard Incorporated, the maker of immensely populated franchises, including Call of Duty and Warcraft, for $68.7 billion. That's how much that video game company is worth to Microsoft. A major purchase, which is going to obviously have consequences that will ripple across the technology industry and the world of video games is my guess. It's going to matter, huh? Call of Duty now running on Windows 95. I made up Microsoft now. President Biden has chosen Los Angeles to host a summit of leaders from Latin America and the Caribbean that are a key part of its outreach to a region increasingly being courted by U.S. adversaries like Russia and China. So the Summit of the Americas will take place the week of June 6th and focus on defending democracy and human rights in the Western Hemisphere, as well as addressing irregular migration, climate change, and efforts to ensure equitable growth as the region emerges from the COVID-19 pandemic, if that ever happens, according to State Department and Associated Press reporting. All right, well, that is your news dump for today. That's all I've got for you. Hope you appreciated all that news gathering. It takes hours of work each and every day. I'm happy to do it, love to do it, and love to give you those news stories, as much context and sound as I can. Can't do it without your paid subscription. I don't have an ad here today, but I do have to ask you to sign up for a paid subscription if you haven't already. And you can always edit your pledge up. Thank you to Brian Pesataro for a very generous raise, a bump. You can always pay more if you're getting more out of the show. I really appreciate that. And all new subscribers, sign up now, standupwithpete.com, or go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic. All right, well, I got 2 great guests joining me today. Cult expert Dr. Stephen Hassan coming up. But before that, I sat down with Turo Paul for the second time. I really liked my conversation with her the first time. I think she's doing very important work. She's the director of the Food and Climate League, Food for Climate League, which we talk about, a very interesting organization, a women-led nonprofit that develops all kinds of strategies to scale and democratize climate-smart food culture. She's the author of Hungry, Avocado Toast, Instagram Influencers, and Our Search for Connection and Meeting. She is a fascinating author and writer and researcher and speaker, and I was really happy to get to have a conversation with her again, and even offered her, I'll just pull back the curtain and say, if she wanted to do something regular, I think her work is unique and important, and she's just a really, really strong and thoughtful voice on this issue. She's on Twitter at Turo Paul, and Food for Climate is a nonprofit, the Twitter for the nonprofit, and EveTuroPaul.com. Ladies and gentlemen, she's back, and it's a great conversation. Here we go. And so happy that you were able to fit me in just before you are about to. Can we say I didn't ask you permission? Yeah. You're about to give birth to your second daughter.
Yeah, I am. Like whenever she wants to arrive.
The due date is, it could happen anytime at this point.
Well, no, due date is in 2.5 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
so I'm banking on having another week at least.
Well, all I'm saying is, when you told me that, and when I was trying to book you, I was really excited to be able to talk to any human person at this point in their pregnancy, and wish you the best of luck. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well in some respects, and I think I'm sad in others. You're like welcoming a new life into the world, which causes a lot of reflection. And so personally, the work I've been doing is really energizing. I feel like I'm doing things that have the potential to make a real positive impact in the world. But I'm also really sad just like reading the news and feeling like, oh my gosh, what am I bringing this person into?
Is that a thing? That's an assumption I make with folks who are having children now, how much they worry. And people say, well, every generation worried that. Amongst other parents your age or with kids your age, is that a conversation that you have? Is there like a group?
I don't know that there's a group. There probably is somewhere, but I think it's reflected in the birth rates. I mean, you just look around the world at plummeting birth rates, and there's a number of surveys at this point now that have said, what is your reason for not having kids? And I think in the past, a lot of it was, economic instability. Now, a lot of it is just like, do I really want to bring someone onto a planet that is going to be going through so much suffering in the decades and years, ahead? And my husband and I, we had a very serious conversation, ongoing conversation for years before we decided to have children. I do know people who have decided not to have kids because of the climate crisis. We personally decided that not having children was a sign that we were giving up and that we need good people to continue contributing to society. And so our every effort to raise sustainably minded human beings. But I think it's super real.
That's a really interesting conversation. And it's interesting to get a window into how you and your husband talked about it. I appreciate you sharing that personal conversation. I'm sure it's not uncommon. But what do you say to people who say, well, every generation of parents had to worry about these existential crises from, war to economic hardship to racism to, do I really want to bring someone into this? What do you say to that?
I was thinking about this on the ride home after dropping off my daughter at school this morning. I was reflecting on exactly this question and this comment that I hear it over and over again. I think that in many respects, it's true. I mean, on the one hand, it's actually some of the most stable, one of the most stable times in human existence. We're much kinder to each other now than we have been if you look back in history. And this is like, if you get into Sapiens and Yuval Noah Harari, and this is his whole theory, right? Is that this is actually a more peaceful time. But the climate crisis is here. It's real, and it is much bigger than anything else that we've ever had to deal with. And I think it feels less impactful in many ways than a war or a famine because it still seems a bit intangible. But as somebody who is constantly reading climate reports, it's really terrifying. It is. And it's just something that I try to grapple with every day and take a deep breath and find the really beautiful things in the world and work on this issue day in and day out.
Yeah, well, I think that's one way to get through it. I mean, you're so purpose driven on this issue. It does seem like, it's great that you're raising human people in this climate, and they will be hopefully folks who will, understand, adapt, and lead and be change makers and influencers. No matter what they do with their choice, they'll have this culture of understanding the need for sustainable living. Yeah, and the work that I've been doing lately is, I think the last time we talked, I had just published my book Hungry, which is really about food trends and the impact of the digital age on our mental health, mental well-being, and really how food culture is being used as a coping mechanism. And it's been really interesting to watch how that's evolved through the pandemic. But now most of my time is working on this nonprofit, Food for Climate League, and I'm taking all of those insights and putting them into kind of climate activism. But it's still at the core. Every day I wake up thinking, not just how do we push policy or kind of push the change makers who are already involved, but it's more like, well, how do we find a way of sustainable living that's delicious and fun? Because it exists. I think that's the other part of this is there's, what gets me up in the morning and what makes me feel hopeful enough to procreate is that when you really look at the solutions to the climate crisis, they're not dreary. A lot of them are really fun. And coming from the food world, there are so many culinary opportunities here. And right now, the whole conversation is about just taking away meat or banning plastic, which is very important. But there's still many other solutions beyond that. And we don't all need to go vegan.
in order to save the planet. So I do like what I get to think about every day, which is also imagining that future world where we can live in a sustainable world. And it's really fun. So it's more so about helping us get there.
Yeah, well, you said a lot there, but just I think what the most important thing just to underscore is the Food for Climate League. May I read about it?
Sure, yeah.
Turo Paul is the founder and executive director of Food for Climate League, a woman-led trailblazing nonprofit that develops narrative strategies and behavioral design interventions to scale and democratize climate-smart food culture. What is
We're working on a simplified description.
Well, I mean, what are your efforts? What are you trying to do? What have been the successes so far with Food for Climate League, and how can folks support it, get on board, and get involved?
Well, thank you for the plug. Simply put, we're trying to change the way that people talk about food and climate issues. We want to change the framing of it. So most often the way that we talk about these issues is in the negative. It's about what we're taking away. It's often by asking people to do something altruistic, which at this point in time, with record high rates of depression, loneliness, stress around the world, that message of altruism, of giving something up for the common good, is only going to resonate with maybe 1% of the global population. It's also elitist. It's exclusionary. It's usually the language is geared towards a white, wealthy Western audience. And those are not the only people who care about the climate crisis. And those aren't the only people who would be excited, who are excited about eating in a way that is more sustainable. And so as an organization, we work with governments, NGOs, corporations to help them kind of reframe the way that they are talking about food and climate issues. That might be, how is something described on a menu? What do you call it? Or what is your internal training around sustainability? How are you talking to your own employees about this in such a way where they don't feel like they're being put upon and asking to give something up? And then we also do philanthropic work that's kind of direct. We call it direct to eater, but messaging that's really just about flipping things on its head, building off of the current trends of today. And oftentimes that means you're talking about what's in the food, what makes the food amazing, and you're not bringing up the climate at all. We want to guide food culture in a more sustainable direction. And lucky for us, there's a lot of different ways to do that. You can highlight the cost savings, the flavor, people's heritages, food sovereignty. There's so many different aspects to this that can talk to things that people really, really care about right now.
I love all of it, and I'm really interested in learning more about it, and maybe somehow getting involved, at least learning the lessons of kind of what you're talking about, because I talk for a living, and I really wanted to talk to you, actually, because I wanted to have a conversation about the topics that you work on. It's really important and different, and it gives people, I think, something else to think about and put their effort into, which is why it's interesting to think about getting involved with your organization somehow. But I think that I wanted to ask you specifically, also made me think of you, was I was having some guilt and I wanted to enter your confessional.
Okay, I'm ready.
We just started ordering the food and the meals in a box.
Yeah. Okay. Meal kits. Yeah.
I don't want to name the company because I don't want to give them a plug. I don't know if they're good or bad, but the meal kits, and they're super convenient. They're delicious. And my wife makes them and she likes it. And it's kind of like, since I'm not helping, I'm not gonna gripe. Yeah. I have a lot of questions about the sustainability practices of sending it all in a box with this weird chemical coolant that I thought was ice and let dissolve in the sink, but maybe it's not ice. And they talk about how sustainable they are, but I think so does oil companies. So what are your thoughts about the way that we're now getting our food, however we're obtaining it, the whole chain of custody of it, especially during the pandemic, how things have changed and how we've adapted, how most of us are eating, and specifically about these meal kits?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Is it?
I think like a lot of food innovations today, nothing is purely wonderful or purely evil. I think based on the meal kit companies, I'm sure that there's someone out there who's done like a carbon footprint map of all of the major meal kit companies. I have not read it, but I'm sure that someone's done it. I'll tell you the benefits of the meal kit. Or actually, I'll start first with the problems. The problems with the meal kit are, of course, mainly plastic use, which I know that a lot of these different companies are working now on kind of compostable or at least recyclable elements to them. But there's a lot of plastic waste, right? And then it is the carbon footprint of just having your meal kind of cut up and then shipped to you. The benefit is you're cooking, and that's great for your health. It also does mitigate food waste. It really depends on the company, but sometimes you'll make a recipe and you'll be like, it calls for half a head of cabbage. With the meal kit company, you just get the half a head of cabbage and then someone else gets the other half. So it depends on the company, but sometimes it is making a meaningful reduction in food waste. So I think that's what you can feel really good about. But ultimately, during the pandemic, more and more people have been learning how to cook. And that's essential for a sustainable food system. We need to be, learning about where our food comes from and the seasonality of it and learning how to utilize it in a way that makes sense for us. And finding ways to do so that financially makes sense for us and time commitment wise makes sense for us. So I'm not going to rag on it. I personally don't do the meal kits because of the plastic waste, but I think there's a lot of benefits.
So I also just wanted to talk to you more generally about, because we taught for the first time about your book 6 months into the pandemic. I went back and listened to that interview, and it was great. And it was a great introduction to your work and to you. But you knew, and you were asking all the right questions about behavior and psychology and habits and consumership and how it was going to kind of change and affect us. You've just touched a little bit on what has happened. So I was kind of really excited to just hear what your thoughts were on. And I tried to look this up. I want to go by how many months. And, you are about to have a baby, so you're going by months and weeks. But I don't know how many months we've been doing this. It's been almost 3 years, right? In March, is that right? The pandemic, since it kind of changed our lives and affected us. But the point is, the bottom line is, how have things changed in the way that we are eating, that we are cooking, that we are shopping, that we are living, that you've noticed and really think matter in a good or bad way?
Yeah, I think it's 24 months. I think it's 24 months because my husband's coming up on his third pandemic birthday. And the first one was like the day things shut down.
So we're headed into our third year.
We're heading into our
Got
third.
it. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, we're 24 months in, which is crazy to think about. And a lot has changed. So again, most of my research over the last decade has been about the impact of tech on human well-being and how that shows up in the way that we choose to spend our discretionary time and income. And the reason why I focused on tech is because that was the dominant force that was impacting people's well-being. Now, of course, it's the pandemic. And unfortunately, a lot of the mental health issues that I have been observing for the last decade plus have just become exacerbated, which is showing up in the way that people are shopping or not shopping, cooking or not cooking, engaging online. It's also been really interesting to see kind of how our emotional state has evolved over these 24 months. So at the beginning of the pandemic, it was like, oh my God, I am anxious. I want to be in control. And that manifested itself through hoarding, through record high rates of comfort food sales. Like SpaghettiOs did really well at the beginning of the pandemic.
Really?
Like people really just wanting like, what is going to make me feel more comfortable? Whereas other people were like, I'm going to start my victory garden. I'm going to go get baby chicks.
Bread.
Other people said, I'm going to learn how to make sourdough bread and I'm going to have like this moment of meditation in my kitchen, right? So we had all of these different coping strategies for this collective anxiety panic attack that we were all having. And over time, we've seen a lot of that kind of spiked those interests. So like, how do you make sourdough? How do you make babka? Banana bread. It was like everyone was making these like serious comfort things.
Yeah.
That spiked and now it's dwindling. But what has maintained itself is an interest in local food systems. So more and more people are sourcing their food locally from local farmers. People have gotten to know the people who actually work in the restaurants near them, right? You've like found the few places where you feel comfortable going. You're getting to know these people. You want to support those businesses. That kind of local attention is also really great for the sustainability movement. We need to be focusing on what grows locally, who's the local talent, what are the local traditions. So that's been really exciting. We've also had a racial justice movement during this period of time. And that's impacting food trends as well. You're seeing a lot of indigenous foods showing up. You're seeing a greater recognition of African-American history and its impact on the American culinary scene. So I'm really curious to see how that starts to impact menus as we start to kind of go back to restaurant life. And then there's also the fact that people are limiting their food waste, cooking different things at home to make their pantry shelf stable and also to save some money. I can say personally, my income took a major hit during the pandemic. And one of the solutions that my husband and I put together was, all right, we really need to be shopping in the bulk aisle. And we now have like 6 or 7 types of beans and lentils on hand all the time, different grains. It's really healthy. It's keeping us feel good. It's good for our budget. And like the little like doomsdayer part of me is like, and we have these bulk ingredients that are going to stay on the shelf for all of time and be okay. So I know that I'm not the only one doing that. I've seen reports of lots and lots of people who have shifted their shopping. Yeah.
All really, really interesting observations and trends. And I sometimes think, and I know this is so insensitive in a way, but I think about it myself in that I've had a lot of privilege in my life and haven't had to overcome tremendous tragedy or adversity. And I feel very fortunate about that. And though when I do have major setbacks, job loss, relationship issues, problems with my parents' health, whatever, luckily they're still with us, that I have a real lack of resilience as a result of, having a pretty good ride. And I sometimes think about that in a weird way about like Americans or even first world countries with the pandemic. We are all having such a hard time. And certainly people who have always, dealt with all kinds of issues are also having a hard time. But in many ways, what you're saying, what it sounds like you're saying, we've also learned a lot of adaptations, and we've seen so many people make major life decisions and choices as a result of things they've learned during this time. And what else do you think about that? Because I think that's been a lot of struggle, but as a result of that struggle, you find, some kind of golden egg over here that you never knew that you were missing or needed.
That's a great way of putting it, right? We're cultivating a culture of resiliency. And I do think that is showing up in like camping, right? People learning how to make the most of the situation that they're in. Okay, I'm going to learn how to do, I want to be a bird watcher, or I'm going to quit my job, right? That's also another trend that's reflecting the mental health, mental state that people are in. But what your comment made me think about is that prior to the pandemic, I personally had identified like these Spartan races and even like women's bar classes. I shouldn't say women's. There's of all genders can attend a bar class. I have only been in them with women, but I've like considered it to be almost like my generation's response to not having a war, where it's like we want to torture ourselves collectively and suffer collectively in some way, which creates this, like if you want to get really nerdy, collective effervescence is what Emil Durkheim calls it, which is like that bubbly connectivity that you feel with other people, that you get during a moment where you're all kind of suffering together. I think my generation, the millennials, were kind of creating that for themselves in a lot of these groups, saying like, hey guys, let's push ourselves to our maximum. Let's do something till we puke. Let's like quiver together. I'll be really eager to see if that kind of workout culture specifically, an extremist culture, wanes in post-pandemic, because as you're saying, we're all kind of going through this, we're going through this trauma together. And so many of us are losing people or losing jobs or facing financial insecurity or, et cetera, et cetera. The challenges are endless, I think, for a lot of people. I don't know. I hadn't thought about that before, Pete, but now I'm like, I wonder how CrossFit's going to do. I mean, I think that they're probably going to do great from the communitarian perspective, but I wonder if the actual regimens are going to become less about suffering.
Well, certainly fitness has gone online. That's for sure. in many ways. So it's interesting to watch, those types of classes. But do you think, I know we're kind of getting far afield from your specialty and your work, but I just want to ask you this one question, is what you think is certainly generationally, millennials, much less, I don't know if we want to talk about ethnicity or not, but like the gender blur has been exacerbated for in some I'm kind of more focused on the new role men are playing or want to play. I think that was already in place even with guys my age. Like they actually really love being with their kids, and you have more opportunity maybe to be with your kids. And so I spent a lot of time with my dad, but I know not everybody did, or they couldn't because of work. And now I think that people just found out about their kids or rediscovered their kids. They weren't going to work every day. They're like, I love being around my kids. I don't want to go back to work. I'm kind of thinking about men and how that gender role has changed. You could take this however you have, if you want to go back into your specific work. But I just do want to know what you think about how that's changed.
Well, so there is a general shift in people's perceptions of what makes them feel well. And so what I had been researching and what I still do research is the current world, the environment we've structured for ourselves, does not allow us to pursue the basics of human well-being. There are so many structures we have created for ourselves that just make us miserable, it makes it so hard to feel like we're safe and in control, that we're connected to a community, that our lives have purpose and meaning. Somehow we've crafted this world that's really, really bad for our well-being. And in the midst of this pandemic, so many of those elements shut down. And this is a part of it, right? People are like, oh, it's really nice to pause for lunch and eat with my child, which is what I get to do now every day. It's lovely. You look at the stats, there's a market research firm, Data Central, that I do a lot of work with. And they early on in the pandemic surveyed people, and it was like, do you want to go back to the office? And a huge portion of the people said, no, I like eating lunch with my family, of both genders, right? Like this is just a fantastic opportunity. Or I get to go outside and go on a walk. And so I do think that this has been a moment where we're challenging kind of those gender roles that many aspects of society are kind of continuing to push us in, because everybody's at home. And I do think that people are discovering, oh, there's certain parts of this that, there's certain habits that I can take on, new hobbies I can take on that are going to improve my well-being. And also, the job market is reflective of the fact that people are just like, F this. Why am I spending my time feeling miserable putting up with X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, the negotiating power of the average worker, whether they've organized in a union at Starbucks or Amazon or they're just, be like, listen, I work from home 3 days a week, take it or leave it.
Right. Exactly.
In a negotiation. But you mentioned something I think is really key and important. I just want to highlight the idea of having a meal. Everybody thinks, it's not original think if your family, always eat dinner together, all that tradition, and the obvious reasons as to why. And having an extra meal, lunch together. And then you also mentioned, now I can go for a walk outside with someone I care about. Those are still the two activities in our lives where I would suggest that it is it's a stigma to take your phone out when you're eating or when you're outside. And so if the pandemic promotes more of that and we're off the screens and that brings us more joy to be in real life, connecting with the people we care about the most, those would seemingly be really interesting two things to look more into how they've changed, because you can never pull out your phone when you're eating, much less when you're outside. Look, dude, put your phone away. Oh, I'm identifying a tree. Okay. It's the only thing you can do.
Or the stars app. I like the astrology.
That's a good one. Strong point.
Yeah, no, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. And this was the trajectory that we were on pre-pandemic was kind of this like digital detox was starting to take place. People were starting to put kind of a Sabbath, like a tech Sabbath into place oftentimes with their families. Friday night to Saturday morning was just family time with board games and looking at one another. But then the pandemic happened and suddenly we're spending all of our time looking at screens. At least, anyone who's working, an office-based job. And now even my husband, who's a school teacher, was stuck in front of a computer.
My screen time is right now, I just checked. It's 25 hours yesterday. Like it added an hour of daylight for me to be on a screen. I'm joking, but I mean, it's bad. It's so bad.
I was like, 25 hours. How are you managing that? Just staying up? I was like, did you pull an all-nighter and add an hour?
I wake up in the middle of the night to check mentions and likes.
Yeah. I mean, there are people who do that.
Yes, that's...
You say it as a joke, but I mean, in my research, it was just crazy to find these statistics on the number of people who said that they would rather have their phone than have sex. We're like, oh no, I'd rather have, like, if you had to give up one thing, your phone or a sex life, but give up the sex. Like, okay, we have a major problem here.
There's got to be some real flaw. That question must. I want to see the breakdown. Were they married, men, women, jobs?
I can go back and find it, but I saw this statistic replicated twice by two completely different research organizations, which is why I thought, okay, this is valid enough. I can use it. But it makes sense to me, though, because the people who are that attached to their phone, the reality is their relationships are also going to be negatively impacted. So they're probably not having great sex. I don't know. But it's reflective, though, of the conundrum that we find ourselves in as a society. And I hope, in terms of future trends, to go back to kind of what the pandemic impact is going to be, I do hope that there is a community experience-centric economy that comes back with force. And there's really, if you're looking at, again, human well-being, what is it that we all need to flourish? You know, we have to have these community connections. And I think that's just become so blatantly obvious to all of us. We need to be outside. That's also become more and more obvious. I mean, the number of people who say that they respect and enjoy nature has gone up around the world. So if you are thinking about starting a business right now, please take that into consideration. Once it is safe to do so, I think all of us are going to be looking for ways to connect face-to-face with people, collaborate on something, experience something together, and it's probably going to be outside. It's probably going to be using all of our senses. It's going to be using our physical bodies. And I'm excited about that future. And I'm hoping that that's the direction that we all start to go in.
Community experience-centric based businesses or entrepreneurs is who we're talking to and about. And it really is interesting. I hope you're right about that. It's also an interesting, to me, kind of core value that I'll go ahead and say a lot of Americans don't generally realize, because a lot of times we think that we spend our money on stuff and things, and sure, they entertain us and they make us happy. But I'm happy that we raised our girls with, my wife spent good money and justified experiences. So trips. And the best thing we probably ever spent money on was our amazing above ground pool. I don't want to brag, but the experiences that create outside, and that people come to your home, having experiences, going skiing and doing things with your family. That's what you're talking about, right? More than having businesses or spending money that are based more on, I don't know, stuff and things, and more consumer. I'm not sure what the opposite of it is, actually. I'm not doing a good job. The opposite of the experience-based.
Well, I think that the experience-based economy was really getting underway already pre-pandemic, right? Think about like the sharing economy. So it's shared office spaces, Uber rides. It was a growing interest in festivals, a growing interest in travel. Right now, a lot of the way that people are spending their time and money is based on, isolation, being at home, activities that you're doing alone, maybe with one other person. But I do think that there's going to be this movement. And the other thing that I think is really important to consider here is, again, the way we choose to spend our discretionary time and income is reflecting how we are doing mentally. What are our coping mechanisms for this moment? Right? We're not going to choose to spend our extra time and money on something that doesn't make us feel good. And there was a mental health crisis prior to the pandemic. And it is now getting to the point where it is frightening, really, when you look at the numbers amongst Gen Zers. The number of young people who have considered suicide during this period of time is alarming. It's a quarter. According to recent studies, the Surgeon General actually released a report believe it was in December or November, that was about this. This is something that he's been paying attention to for a long time, Dr. Murthy, and he was trying to kind of, I think, fight the COVID headlines to say, hey, we have this other massive, massive health crisis. But when you're thinking about, what's culture going to look like moving forward, you need to consider the fact that we have these record high rates of depression and anxiety and loneliness and stress. And ideally, the businesses, the way that people choose to spend their time and money moving forward are going to help us fix those problems, address them, give us new opportunities to feel comforted, to feel engaged, to feel like we are connected to other people in a meaningful way. So, these are the ways of kind of flipping it on its head, which is going back to your comment about a resilient culture. We're figuring out the things that we need to feel resilient. And I'm hoping that we collectively are able to do that as we emerge from this moment, and that businesses, different local programs can help facilitate the things that are really important to us. Having real conversations, looking people in the eye, sharing a meal, learning a new hobby, getting outside, all of those.
I don't want to rain on that idea, but they have to be profitable. And I feel like that's where we're at with the climate crisis as well. If we're not going to be able to put in strict regulations, policies that affect the entire world on fossil fuels, on consumption, on renewable energy, et cetera, if we're not going to, then there's no real, it's hard to think that there's a way out, but the solutions kind of lie in making them attractive, making, electric cars and solar panels, of which I've had forever, but making them more attractive to everybody. And so the same is, I feel, true about what you're talking about in kind of the revolution of culture and business. It works if it's profitable. And sometimes I just get concerned that the easiest and cheapest and most fun thing to do is stay at home with your video console and your screen.
Okay, so I do think that the experience economy prior to the pandemic, people who were running like Wanderlust, for example, that's running yoga.
Yeah, I attended Wanderlust.
Oh, okay.
But for people who don't know, it's like this amazing experience. I actually didn't do the classes, but my wife did. And we were on the side of a mountain in the Rockies near Aspen, Snowmass, and there were classes and there were people and there was a ton of performance, and the performance was amazing, and it was the music. It was an amazing experience. I'm just trying to give color to Wanderlust to make your point. Sorry.
They did extremely well. So I'm just saying there's numerous examples of if there's demand, people will pay for it. Yeah. And I do think the millennial generation historically has paid more for experiences than for things. And I think that's going to become supercharged. You now have Gen Zers who are coming into their spending power, who were raised during this pandemic, who understand that sitting at home is making them miserable. So I do think that there is going to be a consumer base, but to go back to this point of you have to have profitability, that's why I started Food for Climate League. I was doing consulting with hospitality companies, CPG companies, and I was hearing from so many of my clients that they were trying to do the sustainable thing, trying to create sustainable products or campaigns, and they were always losing money on it. And their response was, I think that young people don't actually give a shit about this. That was how they were interpreting it. And I took a step back, having done interviews with people around the world on this topic, and said, no, people really do care. People are also suffering. They're also really obsessed with food and use it as a coping mechanism. We're just talking about this issue the wrong way. We're talking about food and sustainability in a way that's not going to get people excited and, wanting to throw their hat in the ring, because people are concerned about so many other things right now. You need to be reframing this and presenting all of the benefits that are not altruistic, that are just indulgent, that make us feel good, that look great on Instagram, that match our budgets, that, meet all of these other basic needs. So our job really at Food for Climate League is to create that culture so that businesses make money by doing the right thing. And ultimately, I agree with you. That's the only way that we're going to get to where we need to go.
And now with social media, for better or for worse, you can help kind of moralize what the right thing might be. Like if this grocery store isn't doing the quote right thing, you can be like, I'm not, this grocery store is doing this and this one is not. And so there's a reputation economy that I've been fascinated with as a result of being so interconnected, which can also obviously be damaging. But foodforclimateleague.org. I'll let you go because you are very pregnant and very kind to join me. But I will say something heartfelt, which is I love talking to you. You're so smart and powerful, and I'm sure that means that your husband is equally as amazing and magical. The idea that you are already raising one, but now hopefully soon a second daughter is very inspiring to know that people like you are bringing people into this world and doing what you're doing, you and your husband. Congratulations on it. Good luck, and thank you so much for joining me. And whenever your maternity period is over, we'd all love to hear about what you learned.
Awesome. Thanks, Pete.
All right, there she goes. Eve Turo Paul, what'd you think? Shouldn't she be at least a monthly regular contributing to our conversation? EveTuroPaul.com, at Food for Climate, at Eve Turo Paul, and get her excellent book, Hungry. Avocado Toast Instagram influencers in our search for connection and meeting. Check out Food for Climate League, her nonprofit. All right, well, now it's time to change gears yet again and talk to a brilliant PhD who was a former cult member. He was in the Moonies cult back in, the late 70s, 80s? I forget exactly when he was in it, but he is the author. He's an author. He's an educator. He's a mental health counselor. He's been described by media as one of the world's foremost experts on mind control, cults, and similar destructive organizations. And he is doing such great work now, launching his own podcast, which I'm really excited to tell you about, preview, and listen to. You've got to check out all of his stuff on his website, freedomofmind.com, and check out the new podcast, The Influence Continuum. I think he's got like 5 or 6 episodes at this point already up. I'm really excited to have Stephen Hassan back, Dr. Stephen Hassan back, for another great conversation, which we covered a lot of ground on. Always love talking to him. Here we go. All right, there he is. Welcome back, Steve. Thank you very much for joining me. It's great to have you back on the podcast, and congratulations. You have just launched your own podcast, which I've told people about. The links are in the show notes. The Influence Continuum. Congratulations, sir.
Thank you so much. I honestly avoided the idea of having a podcast for years until I was told, people aren't watching your interviews for your blogs, Steve. You have a few hundred. You need to make them into audios and make a podcast. And then I got a very generous offer from the Michaelis brothers, the Midas Touch guys. Let us put you up on our platform. So that took a few months, but we started it, and I'm very excited because the response is awesome.
Oh, that's great. That's how that came about. Yeah, I like their work. I don't know much about them, but I certainly have enjoyed and think their work has been important. So that's cool. Oh, great.
So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that you talking, plus you have this great, unique voice, which I love. I love talking to you and hearing your voice. So that's good for podcasting, too. It doesn't come through if we're reading. But
I thank you so much, but my voice actually isn't normal because I've had reflux that I'm trying to get treated. So my throat sounds funky to me, but I'm glad you like it.
Well, I actually prefer the reflux effect on your voice. So with all due respect, I hope you don't solve that horrible problem. I know that can be really difficult, but I'm here to hear you.
That's so funny.
So, okay. Well, what is this?
Can I just compliment you first? Because I'm a fan of yours, and you had me on when so many other media outlets were scared of talking about the cult of Trump. And you were like, no, I really want to understand this. Explain it to me. So I thank you, and thank you for being open to helping.
Oh, well, I'm happy to. I like to think that I played a role in elevating your work so that bigger, larger, and even corporate media platforms would have you. And it does seem like, it feels good when you respect someone's work and then you see other people that are more credentialed than you perhaps saying, yeah, I can confirm that this guy's work. I believe that this guy has a lot of credibility. I mean, I think I already knew that about you, but so many others started bringing you on and promoting your work, including I feel like all the big media companies. Where do you feel like media, journalism, different institutions are on the type of work that you have been doing on cults and all of the psychology, sociology, all of the social problems around them?
That's a great question, profound. And I want to start by saying that I got my doctorate since I think we talked last, which I did on undue influence in the law. So I think that, and I started wearing a tie when I do interviews occasionally.
That's a game changer. It really makes you more serious. I think your face was...
Yes, I'm more serious. But it's a really important question. And I think that the media has really missed an important dimension in mental health. And they just don't... I think they should be having credentialed mental health professionals on major shows to explain anxiety disorders, to explain phobias, to explain how to sleep properly, because sleep is so important to good health and to bolstering your immune system. So in general, I have a gripe that the media is not giving mental health professionals enough airtime, especially in this polarized world. But getting into my unique situation, I think people suffer from what social psychology calls the fundamental attribution error, which is a fancy way of saying we have unconscious biases when we're trying to understand other people's human behavior. And we tend to overestimate the personality of the person or the disposition and underestimate the context or the social environment. And what we've learned from social psychology is, like, Steve's an intelligent person from a good family, educated, no traumas in his childhood. He got deceived by women in the Moonies when he was in a vulnerable state, and he was subjected to social psychology. So what I'm trying to say is the media thinks anyone in a cult is stupid or crazy or uneducated, and it just isn't true. So I think that's a bias. But more importantly, I think there are real authoritarian cults in the cult of Trump, or I should say in the cult of the Trump that's taken over the GOP. And they have corporate influence to say, don't have this guy on or don't talk about the cult of Trump. It's too polarizing. And yet everyone knows that, if you have a pyramid structure and a black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil reality, and you're dependent and obedient through fear and control of disinformation, that's the authoritarian cult.
Of course, you're talking about your own personal experience when you used when you went to third person, talked about Steve. That was you. You're the one who, in a vulnerable state. Now, just in case people don't know.
It's critical that people get that, because people continually say, and they use very nasty words to describe true believers. I was just looking at a Politico article talking about how Trump fans are waiting for RFK Jr. to come back and run with Trump in 2024. And it's like, he's dead, but so they must be stupid, but they've really been indoctrinated and they're not allowed to think other ways, other negative thoughts about it.
Let me just go back to something you said. If media segments focus more on mental health, the burden there is producing a media segment, if we're talking about TV or radio or podcast or YouTube, that is interesting, that people will watch and be affected by. Are there issues that happen in the news or trends that are happening in our life as a result of the pandemic or divisive politics or anything else that you think that there should be these kind of segments dedicated to, to help people dealing with, because
100%. Like we see, medical doctors, epidemiologists, experts on COVID and vaccination. We're not hearing mental health professionals saying, people need 8 hours of sleep in order to help their immune system. And here are the strategies, like you need to chill your room at night to 66 degrees. You need darkened shades. You need to have white noise if there's other sound. I mean, there's a lot of knowledge that mental health professionals can share to help people cope with anxieties, with phobias, and so many other things. And it seems like the media is more interested in sensationalistic, fear-oriented things rather than like reassuring foundational things that will actually serve people.
Well, the media is hard to describe, and define. And so now the fact that you are now a media creator, I mean, you have been from the standpoint of being an author and writing several books, but now your podcast will go a long way to address, of course, the issues that you're an expert in. To be in a cult means to be that you're stupid. How should we handle people who believe that dead people are coming back to run for president? How do I handle that guy? What am I supposed to say to that guy? How do I deal with that guy? If he's at work with me and he's like, you know what? This weekend you should come to the rally with me because this is when the Lord is going to return. Like it sounds...
So if you're asking me a hypothetical of you talking to someone at work, I can work with that. If someone told me, how do I talk to my son who's 37, who refuses to get vaccinated? That's a different approach. The general approach is, you know what? You seem very intelligent. I respect you. I like working with you, but I don't understand how you have this belief. But I'm open to discussing it with you. And if there's evidence that's convincing of changing my mind, I just need to ask you, are you open if we discuss things and we're both agreeing to search for the proof and the evidence of anything, that we both seek out what's true and what's real? And then what you want to aim for is with questions, good questions with a long silence, waiting for a response, and then follow up. That's what's going to help people wake up. I can tell you categorically, when I was in the Moonies and people said, you're brainwashed, he's a cult leader, I felt persecuted as a Moonie. I thought that they were satanic. It reinforced my commitment to the cult. So it had the opposite effect of everyone who was trying to talk to me.
Better to ask people why they think what they think, and would they be open to thinking anything differently, as opposed to forcing your facts and data and argument down their throat, because that one is more satisfying for me. But what do I do? But I want to be effective. What do I do if he fires back, he calls me a sheep and then makes a sheep noise at me?
So I get hired by families to coach them how to talk to their cult member adult sons and daughters. And I have to tell my clients, listen, your son has a man-made mental illness. It's a dissociative disorder. There are two selves in there, like there was Steve Hassan, the real Steve Hassan, and then the Mooney Steve Hassan. Your goal is to be an anchor and a rock to understand you're dealing with someone who has an artificially imposed mental illness, and you can afford to hear things and not get triggered and take it personally. Because if you understand the programming, and I usually introduce people to former members who can explain the mindset, etc., and we can do role playing, because role playing really is very effective. But what I've learned is that people first have to believe there's hope for this person to wake up. And I'm telling you categorically, I was as fanatical as anyone I've ever met in my 45-year career. There is hope, but what's going to help people get out is more thoughtful, respectful, kind compassion with good questions, rather than name calling and descending into a tit for tat. I want to win this, debate.
I've actually been applying a lot of your techniques on the Facebook page. In the community I live in, there's a lot of folks that's mostly conservative, and I'm arguing with them both publicly at the Board of Education meeting over course curriculum, school curriculum, and I'm arguing with them on Facebook. But I am really doing my best to not use my skill set as a judgmental prick who has a witty remark for everything as a stand-up comedian. I'm trained that way.
Yes.
I have to stop myself and be thoughtful and not name call and not make assumptions and not make generalizations. And it's absolutely working. And I went out with my biggest adversary on Facebook and in public meetings. We went out and had drinks. I mean, I had drinks. He had White Claw. But the point is, we're talking, and it's as a result of using your techniques. So my question to you is, that's how I think, applied it. How have people that you've worked with applied it? And what are we talking about, Stephen? Are we talking about the cult of Trump? Are we talking about QAnon? Are there labels? Give me an example of how we should be thinking about these folks that are, as you identified, to be in some kind of cult thinking or cult itself.
So at the risk of plugging my book, The Cult of Trump, it's still very relevant. And in Chapter 7, I describe numerous authoritarian cults that comprise the cult of Trump. So there's really a big difference talking with someone who's involved with, for example, New Apostolic Reformation, which has 30 to 40 million Americans in it, versus someone who's a white supremacist or someone who's a libertarian, Ayn Rand devotee. So you want to customize, you want to find out someone's background. And where I like to, so I want to just say your skills as an improv person is exactly what is most effective in applying.
Yeah, but you can't ask,
approach.
I mean, that's the problem. The problem is that's a skill set that most people don't have, or if they have it, they struggle with kind of employing it in such situations. It's hard to kind of, be quick thinking and be, I've been doing it. It's part of my job. Most people can't, I feel like, have a harder time as I would doing their job. I'm just saying.
Exactly. I'm not saying everyone needs to have your skill set or get the training, but you weren't born an improv guy. You learned it, and it was because it made you happy. It made you fulfilled. It was challenging.
It got me out of a lot of scrapes, I think, most importantly.
Right. But so anyway, there's so much I want to say. Where to start? So the important, what I want to start with is not me, actually, is Daryl Davis. Do you know Daryl?
Yeah, I do. And I've been meaning to get him on the show. My friend, John Carroll knows him. And,
this is a professional musician, awesome guy, big black dude who has gotten 300 people out of the KKK. Like, you go, how could he do that? And it was because he played music that they loved. They thought he was playing like Jerry Lee Lewis. And he's like, yeah, Jerry Lee's my friend. He's copied my style. It's like, let's have a brew together. And how come you hate me? You don't even know me. Right. Why don't we hang out and you can get to know me? You can find out, about my life, and I'll find out about your life. The guy succeeded with the most fanatical, racist cult in America. One of the worst. So it's not just my method. I can assure you, Daryl didn't study Steve Hassan's method.
Right.
His father, I believe, was in the State Department. He traveled around the world and he learned about, hey, each country has its own culture, and I have to understand what the culture is and not assume their culture should be my culture. So through his life experience and his own security, the other thing I love about Daryl is he said, I know who I am. I'm not threatened when people call me names or tell me things about me that are not true, because I'm fundamentally anchored.
I think that is such an important point when you're trying to feel rooted in your certain sense of what you believe, in this case, right? Morality. Knowing who you are means what? That they can't what?
So if you know what you stand for, you won't fall for anything, right? It's people can try to sell me on all kinds of Ponzi schemes and MLMs and groups. And I'm like, cool, if it's true or if it's real, And then I know I have a system for how to sort out what's real and what's not real. And it has to come down to, accountability, honesty, transparency, responsibility. And it needs to be not someone who's a malignant narcissist with pathological lying. I'm not going to follow anyone. I learned my lesson with Sun Myung Moon. Don't follow a guy who's a liar, because he's not trustworthy. And that's Donald Trump. He's not trustworthy.
Well, you say that, but people firmly believe, for whatever reason, that he is. How do we take your work, and what's the word that they use in corporate speak, like leverage it or scale it up? That's what they say, scale it up. So you have a great new podcast, and I want to, talk about that, and be great if that became a super popular podcast and everybody were listening to it. But how do we take the work of cult experts? I mean, don't we need a cult expert core if we're going to convince millions and millions? Because the cults that you have generally studied and talked about, aren't they more likely smaller groups of people? We're talking about like a third of our country might be, no longer understand how to find out what the truth is. How do we scale your work up? Talk to me about what you're doing and why, your podcast, The Influence Continuum, should be replicated, or there should be some kind of a project, larger project.
So I'll take a minute just to flash the Influence Continuum itself, Pete. It's on my freedomofmind.com website. But the idea is that it's not a binary, but a continuum of ethical to unethical. And the more anyone controls your behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions, and makes you dependent and obedient, the more authoritarian it is. So there's substance and science to why I called it the influence continuum. And I also wanted to talk about healthy side of the influence continuum. But to answer your question, I've been waiting for an angel to show up who says, what do you need, Steve, to scale up, de-radicalization for tens of millions of people? And that hasn't happened. So what I've decided is to do everything in my power. So I've developed a course that's on my website called Understanding Cults, the Basics. It's 3.5 hours, very inexpensive. I'm developing a course for mental health professionals on how to identify and how to do therapy with folks in cults. Then I'm going to do one on how to help rescue someone from a cult, and that's going to be very big. And then I'm going to do one on how to recover if you've exited a destructive cult. I'm also working with a group of exes of many different cults doing a hashtag I got out.
Oh.
Gotout.org. The idea is to destigmatize the fact that intelligent, educated people got conned and brainwashed and mind controlled into some abusive group, whether it was a religious cult or a political cult or a therapy cult, or married the wrong person who was a narcissist and controlled the hell out of them, to teach everybody this stuff. And my idea is to be able to then develop modules, like if you have your child in a cult, like watch this video with your loved one, and these questions are the ones you should engage in. And I want to come back to, there's a lot going on online, so we could do stuff online. We could have, my resource center could be, in many languages, etc. But we also, what really works is real people caring. Like my father looking me in the eye and crying and saying, how would you feel if it was your son who dropped out of college, quit his job, got involved with a controversial group? How would you feel? And he was crying. And my father was of the generation where guys don't cry. So this was monumental. And despite my programming, it touched my heart. And even with all my indoctrination, I was like, I know he's brainwashed by the communist media to think that father is not the Messiah, but I want to prove to him I'm not brainwashed. I want to prove to him I'm not in a cult. So I said, I'd probably be doing what you're doing now, And I said, what do you want me to do? He said, just talk to these ex-members for 5 days. And then if you want to go back to the group, I'll drive you there myself. But at least these are the critical words, at least your mother and I will be able to sleep at night knowing we did the responsible thing. So I volunteered to prove my family was wrong, that I wasn't in a cult. And in that effort, my honesty and my integrity and my idealism, which got me involved in the first place, wanting to make the world a better place, woke me up, at which point I was horrified that I had become a fascist sub-leader who thought that democracy was satanic. And I don't know if you remember this from my first book, Combating Cult Mind Control, but Moon told us to go to the Capitol stairs and fast for Nixon during Watergate. And previous to the Moonies, I hated Nixon and thought he was a crook. But I believed it. I believed God wanted Nixon to be president. Didn't matter that he broke laws.
Right.
God wanted it. And that's the mindset of 30 to 40 million of Trump followers. They have apostles or prophets that they believe are getting direct revelations from God and who are covering them from satanic invasion. And that if they don't do what their apostle tells them, they're going to lose their salvation. Like, that's the mindset.
So when it comes to where we're at right now, in the middle, seemingly, I don't know where we're at with the pandemic and the available miracle vaccines that have been developed, it is just so important and sad to see that the anti-vax ideology corresponds to political ideology. This data has been run over and over and over, and people are anti at least this vaccine and probably soon others where they are in conservative states, where Donald Trump is still, very influential. How do you, that's a unique danger, it would seem, the corresponding or the overlapping ideologies, the political ideology that overlaps into this public health nightmare that people don't believe that this miracle drug will work, but do believe that it will, might give them a tail or whatever other number of things they believe about this vaccine.
Right. So another thing in my book is that we are living in the age of undue influence, where there's psychological warfare being waged on us by enemies of America, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, ISIS, just to name a few, but also internal enemies of democracy who want to make this a theocracy, want to destroy human rights in the United States, who want to undercut women's right to choose. And so there's deliberate weaponization of social media and other media outlets that people are being indoctrinated into. And yes, it's a reality, but the cure to blind faith is perspective. And when families and friends just block their relatives and friends who are in that mindset, they're just depriving the people they care about from an opportunity to actually begin reality testing. But if you say that's stupid, that's dumb, that's not going to get through to them. But hey, I respect you. I miss you. You're an important person. I value you. And I really sincerely apologize if I've called you names in the last 5 years, but let's talk. And with very religious people, honestly, I think religious Christians who actually believe in Jesus and know the Bible are going to be the people we want to empower to be messaging. For example, when one of these pastors who's anti-COVID, it was a hoax and they're dying of COVID, why isn't there not an organized effort to reach out to all their parishioners to start conversations about, your pastor, you cared about him. He regrets that he told you that it's a hoax. time to get vaccinated, right? Nobody's doing that. And, but it would take real organization and strategy to think about what kind of messaging would affect this subcult of the cult of Trump. But it's definitely doable. Why? Because then the bottom line, Pete, is people don't like to be lied to and taken advantage of. And trust me, people get pissed when they realize they've been taken.
Right.
Like I got pissed. And I know a lot of ex-Scientologists and a lot of ex-Nexium people and all kinds of other cults. And that's another very important point, which is if you can talk to people about groups they believe are cults, real cults, and what works is pimps and traffickers and the techniques they use to groom and indoctrinate their slaves, or the Chinese communist brainwashing techniques, and then go into the BITE model, specifically how those groups are doing it. Then you have a foundation for a conversation because they're being told that you're brainwashed, but now you have the granular behaviors to check. Is there sleep deprivation? Is there privacy deprivation? Are you told not to talk to critics or former members or watch other TV shows than the ones that they want you to watch, etc.? Once you get granular, then it becomes more obvious. And that's what happened in my deprogramming. They went through Robert Lifton's Chinese communist brainwashing 8 points, one by one. And it was like, well, we do that. We do that. We do that too. We do that too. And then at the end of 8, I was like, I'm confused because we're God and they're Satan, but we're doing the same brainwashing. I still wasn't ready to exit, but it made me real close. And that's another key thing, is creating dissonance between someone's real self and their cult self.
It's also fascinating. Freedomofmind.com to learn more about that BITE model and learn more about the techniques. And maybe you need to hire Dr. Hassan to help you with your family member or loved one as well. And hopefully other people will be replicating a lot of what you're doing. It's just the one kind of, I guess, intimidating idea about it, and we've talked about this before, is that usually when we're talking about cults, again, we're talking about smaller group of people versus the president of the United States with a giant corporate and independent media platforms, hundreds of them, supporting the every lie. It's not like any other cult leader to have a platform to constantly, repetitively, over and over announce your lies and your scandals and your conspiracies. How does that?
I don't know. I think China does a much more effective job, and Putin. So I would call them both political cults. They're authoritarian political cults. So, but yes, the issue is we now live in the digital age where Facebook has become weaponized, and our privacy of our own data about our own interests and preferences is not protected, so that bad actors can buy our information and find out through AI what's going to push our buttons to make people not show up to vote or to vote for the other person than they would ordinarily vote for.
I want to ask you just about your podcast and to talk a little bit about it. How many episodes have you done? How many will you do each week? What's the format? How can people find it?
So it's the Influence Continuum, and my understanding, it's on the Midas Touch platform, but my understanding is it's on everywhere.
It's available everywhere. The Influence Continuum with Dr. Stephen Hassan. What is a typical episode, and how often will we get to listen to it?
So great question. The original plan was to do one a week, and so far we're doing 2 a week because there's so much interest.
Great.
And the question is whether, because I'm a counselor and I'm doing these courses and I have these other projects, can I maintain the 2 a week pace? Because as a podcaster, a lot of work and preparation goes into each episode. But at the moment, we're looking at 2 a week. And we finished 8 in the can. I got myself one of these fancy microphones, so I sound better. And I'm having some amazing guests come on. And I repeat, I'm not interested in just talking about brainwashing and mind control cults. I'm interested. I have an episode about to come out with a pediatrician who's an expert in hypnosis, who has a very important mind-body new framework for healthcare, how to think about human beings and language and healthcare. So that's in the box. We have Molly Koch, who's been teaching parenting workshops for 60 years. She's 94 years old, and I wanted to capture her wisdom.
Wow.
So we have that in a can to share with our guests. I've interviewed Bandy Lee, Malcolm Nance now, and I have somebody from the Heroic Imagination Project of Philip Zimbardo, who I'm going to be interviewing.
So it's a lot of you asking these great people, peers of yours, in some cases, questions, and as opposed to giving the answers, or just a conversation.
I'm more interactive.
Yeah, okay,
I'm
great.
not just interviewing.
Because I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear the answer. You're the kind of guy. I don't know that you need guests. It's just so you could just do a different voice and ask yourself a question and then answer.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, honestly, Ben Meiselis, who's the one who said, let's put you up. He said, I want the first episode to be why you're doing this episode, this podcast. So it's just me, myself, and I for 30 whatever minutes. But yes, I can do more by myself and pick a topic if that's what people want to hear. But I have really a lot of great material that I've already put in the can. And then the question is, do I bring things out of the vault? I've heard people saying, I'm going to bring some out of the vault. The quality isn't as good as this, audio-wise, but I have stellar.
Well, if you want bonus content, talk to the guys. I'll give you all the episodes, all the conversations we taught to, and you can repurpose them on your podcast. It'll make me look good because you're such a smart guy. So I'll do whatever I can to help you, and obviously promoting the podcast. And
thank you. And I want to just say, as intelligent as I am, I didn't spell my name right for the thing. I put in I forgot the T in Steven.
We're on a video link using the StreamYard app, and you type your name in, and you wrote your name not as Steven but as Seven. Which I did see that your first name said Seven, and I thought to myself, dude's not all the way out of the cult. I guess he's still holding on to his cult name. Seven, come over here. It's your turn to serve.
Yes, well, it was a typo, so I apologize. But Pete, you're the best. I really appreciate you.
Of course, I really appreciate you, and I'm so grateful to have you join me again. And I hope folks will go back and listen to other conversations we've had, and of course, check out all of your work, all the links to it on the show notes for today's episode, or just go to freedomofmind.com to get the books, the workshops, and more info on the podcast, The Influence Continuum, with Dr. Stephen Hassan. My pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stand up. All right, there he goes, Dr. Stephen Hassan, everybody. freedomofmind.com. freedomofmind.com. Get all of his books, his online courses, interventions, and recovery coaching, and listen to his new podcast, everybody, The Influence Continuum, which is sounds really, really great. Love talking to Dr. Stephen Hassan, and also Turo Paul. Thank you. And thank you to everybody who's supporting this podcast so I can come out in my shed and interview these great people and do these great news recaps each and every day. I do hope to see you tomorrow night at the Hangout. That's every Thursday night at 8. If you are a subscriber, always rejuvenate and laugh and commiserate. Always great to connect with you there. But for now, I bid you adieu. I'll see you on the Discord platform. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com, anything that you want, and I will talk to you right here tomorrow. But right now, it's John Carroll singing us out with our song, Stand Up, everybody. Off of your butt, down off of your fence, even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense, and you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town, just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down, boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown.
stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and hear